1 green check mark, 2 green check marks. I see 3 green check marks. Ladies and gentlemen, gamers everywhere, welcome to the final panel of INVICTUSCON 2021. My name, of course, is James Schwartz. I have been your wonderful mediator, commentator. There's a word for it. Moderator. There we go. For the past several panels. And I am here today with some of the most amazing people in TTRPG podcast, and I am so excited to have them there. We have RK Wilde, Joe Fallak, Travis Vengoff, and Persephone. I'm so excited to have you guys here. I want to give a quick, wonderful shout out to my amazing wife and partner, Elizabeth Wilcox, who was... I give her 100% credit for getting you all together and reaching out to you guys and getting you to be on this panel, and I am beyond excited to have you all here. So if we could just go through, and if you all could tell me a bit about yourselves and the audience about yourselves and your wonderful shows and why you think your shows are unique. And then we're going to jump on in to what is... I'm banking on this being my favorite conversation of the weekend. No pressure.
No pressure.
No pressure at all.
None whatsoever.
RK, why don't you start?
Hi, I'm RK Wilde. I am the GM / game runner of Prism Pals, a all LGBTQ+ family-friendly / all ages podcast. I GM'd Volume 1, and we're working on Volume 2 right now / we're on hiatus. I'm also the GM for The Burned Bunch, which is an actual play stream of Monster of the Week on Off the Table's Twitch channel.
Excellent.
Also, I use they, them pronouns.
Hey, there you go. Perfect. Next up, we have someone who is very familiar to all of you out there, or at least should be, the wonderful, lovely Miss Joe Fallak.
Hi, I'm Joe Fallak. If you don't know me, I am the DM and showrunner of Dice Shame podcast. I also appear on the Invictus stream on a weekly basis. But Dice Shame is really my child, so I'll talk a little bit about that right now. It is a Wizards of the Coast 5e actual play podcast. We're running through Storm King's Thunder. I've got my map of Faerun up here on the wall just for my easy reference. It's kind of a family affair. So the PCs in the party are my fiance, our best friends, Harlan, my fiance's brother, and then Rob's there too. So we have a good time. We're fairly casual. We like to have a lot of laughs. Yeah, we don't take ourselves too seriously, but we're very inclusive, welcoming in our community, and we're really happy to be here just running INVICTUSCON and saying hey to everyone. RPGs and all that. So yeah, hi.
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Next up, we have Travis. How are you doing this morning?
Hey, everyone. Having a good time this morning. I'm Travis Vengroff, the GM, DM, sound design producer, and writer of Dark Dice. We are a horror podcast in the TTRPG space using 5e. It's very polished, very edited, very little table talk, and my job is to scare you, and our job is to all have fun in a way that tells collective stories that will frighten and disturb. And we've got like an orchestral soundtrack, some hurdy-gurdy, and come for the horror, stay for the hurdy-gurdy is our motto.
Excellent. And finally, Persephone, please tell us about your show.
Hi, I'm Persephone, aka Persephorath. I am the GM and creative director of Fast Times at D&D High and the parent company ArcanaCast. We run a 5e comedy dramedy podcast that's about a bunch of misfits in a modern D&D setting. And it's a lot of fun. I would say that we are a midway podcast as far as table talk versus editing. We are considered a pretty polished podcast just because we do have high production values. We do a lot of our own compositions for the show as well as using like royalty-free stuff. And yeah, we've been running for about a year and it's my baby, essentially.
Excellent. Well, as all of you in the audience, I'm sure have noticed, these are all very unique shows. I think they're very unique. And one of the reasons why we wanted to do this panel and kind of theme it around is because I consider all of these shows to have a very high production value, which is something that I think is the biggest difference between a production show, for a podcast, and then an actual game at your everyday tables. Like for me, I produce and I GM for the Dimension Door podcast, but those sessions and those games and the final outcome that I'm trying to find is a lot different than one of my regular everyday, used to be in-person sessions. And I'm almost certain that everyone else's is pretty similar to that. So Travis, RK, Persephone, you guys are all running homebrews. Joe, like myself, is running a pre-written campaign. And there are a lot of changes that I make to the pre-written campaign. Joe, I'm sure, is the same way. But I'm wondering how many changes you all make to your original plans as you go through the game and as the production sort of unfolds.
Nothing is set in stone.
Yeah.
Nothing is set in stone to the point where it cannot be changed. Whether it's for safety reasons or because a player has come up with an idea that's way cooler than what you originally had. Like, nothing is ever set in stone for me, especially with my original, like the volume 1 of Prison Pals. A lot of stuff changed because of what the players were interested in. At no point was I ever like, this is your pre-described journey, you are not allowed to deviate. The players often deviate and do their own thing and make their own choices, and I build the world around them. So, like I said, nothing's ever in stone unless it's something you've talked with them and been like, hey, this is something that needs to happen, or this is something that should happen in the process of the story. Or vice versa. If they come to you and they say, this is where I really want to go with my character, this is the kind of stuff I really want to explore, then that can be set in stone. But like, when it comes to, I think a lot of GMing, especially a podcast, is that you need to be adaptable. And part of that also comes with the edit. Like, you might need to change your edit for that, or like cut out certain things that were in the original recording that you don't want for your final product, that kind of stuff.
I would amend that slightly. My goal also is to create literature or campaigns that people can run through themselves, like Domain of the Nameless God and others that we've got going. So I have kind of an outline of where people are going to go, but they do always deviate. Pages and pages get thrown out as they skip the room and go to the right instead. So we do need to be adaptable.
Yeah, adaptability is one of the most important things that you can do, because like, it's a collaborative effort at the table. It's not just you as a storyteller, GM, DM, whatever term you want to use. It's players have to have autonomy, to have investment, to have any sort of like immersive experience. So yeah, like I have thrown out settings, like entire just pieces of the campaign, like entire just like locales and stuff, because players went in a different direction. So it's super important to be adaptable, even in a production actual play rather than a casual one.
At the same time, and I agree with all of you that being agile in terms of your planning and your own ideas as a DM, it's one of the most important qualities in an advanced DM, is that you're able to sort of move and adapt to what your players want to do and what they're interested in a campaign. However, I think as a DM who's running a show that other people are going to be consuming, sometimes it is helpful to sort of give the players a little bit of a peek behind the DM screen in certain ways at certain specific times, to kind of let them know, this session I'm going to be focusing on these 3 themes, and I'm hoping to lead you into this direction. Do you guys find that you ever sort of change the way that you're running a game to allow the product that you're producing to be a little bit more coherent than a home game would be?
See, this is something that was actually very hard for me to accept. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And it was something that like I had to be like pushed to start doing, because I was like still in the headset of like wanting everything to be like either a shock or surprise to the players, or still keep that like very, unique reaction that players get when they're like surprised or like in a good way towards something that's happened in a campaign. It's Yeah, sometimes you do have to give that little peek. It just like, especially for the style of like game that I'm running, a horror podcast might be different. I don't know if
Yeah,
Travis.
Travis.
I do not give them any peaks.
Yeah.
Well, I've had
Yeah.
entire people like bonus characters in the stream because I do everything via Zoom, and they don't realize that it's actually just me passing notes to somebody who's like a spy who's like gonna be an evil NPC and betray them. Like,
Sneaky.
I'm very big into dickery, but I have been buying it. They're okay with it, right? And that's a key thing. The players they filled out what they're not okay with and what they may or may not be okay with, but they're all right with me doing these things. It's like going into a haunted house with your friends and you're like, oh, I'm gonna be scared, this is gonna be so fun. And we're kind of all trying to tell a story that will scare other people too. So but they also have a lot of agency within, like, okay, just commit to being your character. If your character would fight with I encourage PvP if it fits, which is probably shouldn't do, but
that is something that's generally frowned upon. I found is player versus player roles. I like to keep a lot of that just like role play. And if one player wants to do a role against the other player, typically I always be like, okay, so how do you guys want to handle this? Do you want to just handle this role play, or do you want to get crunchy with mechanics? Because like if player A wants to throw a punch at player B and player B wants like their character to get hit because that's narratively exciting to them, honestly, I just let that happen, because the player to player consent is great. And I think that a lot of times dice can just be like a good decider. Like if you're not sure, like as a DM, I'm always rolling dice. Like nothing is set in stone for my games, which is really fun. And I like to think of it as like every time a player makes a choice, that's my dog.
Puppy.
Nova.
Yeah, look at his little butt right there.
Adorable.
I was going somewhere with this. I think that it's important to keep track of player choices and track them down the line. So like whenever someone makes a choice, I'm like, okay, so this is going to affect this and this and this down the line. And one of the things I implement in my games that I feel is kind of sneaky is a timeline. Nothing has a set time, like especially with a pre-written game. It's like, oh, when the players arrive here, this just so happens to be happening and they arrive at a perfect time. I don't do that. I look at the game and I'm like, okay, so according to the module, if it takes them like 5 days, if the game says it takes them 5 days to get there, if the players for whatever reason go slower or faster than that, they're going to miss that perfect timed window. And sometimes events happen, and like for one of my at-home games that I run, they were a full week ahead of schedule. And I'm like, okay, this building, it happens. It totally happens, especially when they get to high levels and have like teleport and shit. Yeah. Oh my gosh. So they arrived and like this entire floating barge was still there that should have been burned down. And because they were early, they saved like 200 people's lives, which was great. But it's player-to-player interaction is a thing. What was that, RK?
I was gonna say, talking about time, like that's something that I actually do for a lot of my games, especially if I know it's gonna be like a longer sort of thing. If it's not like, oh, this campaign happens over one day. If it's like a longer sort of event, I often make a timeline and say, if the players do not interfere, these are the events that will unfold on these days at these times.
Yes,
the players
yes,
do not get
absolutely.
Involved.
Yeah, that's something that I totally do.
If the players do get involved, that might all shift, because we like Prism Pals Volume 1 started as like the players were in a town far away from where like the major action was happening. They eventually got there, and then if they chose to interact with certain things, that would change those timelines. But I basically had a list of these events and said, if they don't interact, they happen, and that'll change the world and how things work around them. So, like, I completely agree with timelines. I think that they're a great tool. I know not everyone loves them, and that's totally fine, but they just work for me in that specific instance.
That is something I've never thought of doing, and yeah, I'm doing that now.
It's
I'm
fun.
just
It's
saying.
cool. It's a
There
really
are-
great way to add immersion because it definitely does introduce a lot of consequences for the player's actions. And I love consequences.
See, I've done stuff that's similar, but I've never thought of it as being on like a timeline because like time is such a wonky thing to keep track of in a campaign. And I like anything that involves numbers, despite being a DM, I avoid like the plague because I'm, that kind of queer. But like, it's definitely something that I want to add to my toolbox now. Thank you for introducing me to that.
Can I just say, there's a online calendar generator that you can make where you can put in how many days are in each month, what the names of each month are, what the days are, when the full moon is, how long the full moon cycle is, and you can save it to your computer and just upload the code every time you want to make changes. That's exactly what I use. So instead of having like just written out numbers, I have a physical like map that I can look at online and be like, here's when this day of when this event happens, here's the day when this happens. Like just actually having the timeline written out is so much easier than just having a bunch of numbers on a page.
Can you just, drop a little link to me for that? Asking for a friend. It's totally not for me. I know how to keep track of days and numbers and
For me, I
things.
tend to kind of approach it, I guess, in a little bit of a more fluid way where I understand that there's like a lot going on in the world, and especially in the module where Wizards of the Coast has written like Storm King's Thunder is happening, like the giants are revolting, whatever, backstory. But it's not a ticking clock kind of a module where if the PCs don't intervene, then the world will end in 30 days. You kind of have an opportunity to, if the PCs get side railed and they get really excited about the politics of a specific town, like they are free to spend a week there and investigate things. So I think I take a kind of more free form approach because it is such a huge world where I'm kind of deciding on the fly what the events are that are happening in the different places where the PCs sort of direct their attention whenever they choose to teleport wherever. That's not to say that specific events don't have like conclusions, or what am I trying to say? That there aren't what is the word? James?
Deadlines?
Goals?
No, like
not gold. Okay.
Plot points?
Repercussions.
Repercussions. Okay.
That there aren't repercussions to a PC's choices, but I think I just take it in kind of a more free form approach where there's not necessarily a ticking clock, although there sometimes are, but not everything that I've invented is like necessarily on a timeline on a grand scale.
I think one of the things that
Thank you, Liz. Consequences.
one of the terms that I've heard because of listening to podcasts came from Dice Populi, which is another wonderful show. But they do a rotating GM model where like every little arc is a different GM and it's all the same characters, which is cool. But one of the GMs says, yeah, I play jazz D&D. Like I have a vague idea of what I want to do, but like it's pretty freeform and on the fly. And I love that term, jazz D&D. So, and if you think about jazz, a lot of like jazzed up like classical pieces, like I say that you all get what I'm saying, because it's not the same as like the written piece, but there's a lot of stuff added and taken out, and you move things around.
It's
so
about
I think
the monsters you don't see.
Yeah. God, I love all
That's
of
like
you.
the exact opposite of what I do. I am one of those high prep GMs to the point where like I will pre-write description for areas, especially because I want them to have impact and stuff.
Absolutely.
But half the time it's just like, well, it's not jazz, but bye, because they don't go there, and that's just something that I accept because I want that sort of high quality immersion, not just for the players, but for the listeners, to the point where we are a retake heavy podcast. Everything's an actual play, but like sometimes we have audio snafus and sometimes things just aren't coming out the way that I want them to or the way other players do. So like I have redone entire sections of like my own description just to make sure it's as spot on as possible. So
I will mirror
Absolutely.
that.
Mhm.
Sorry, go ahead.
We're
Yes,
all
sir.
nodding like, yeah.
Yeah, we're all like, yes, that's right. Yes.
I mean, a lot of podcasts don't do retakes. I'm just like, how? I am such a control freak. I'm just like, what? And my audio editor is too. Like we do like 3 QA sessions per finished episode, and beyond that, it's like hours of work to just do one episode. Like a lot of hours.
Do you find that you get pushback from your players if you ever need them to retake dialogue? Like, I know with Dice Shame, there's one specific player at the table who I think he's like, well, just like I did it, and that's what the character said, and that's how he was feeling, and like that's how it happened, right? Whereas for me, I sort of sometimes need to say like, well, I don't know if you were really thinking about how your character was feeling in the previous episode when you said it. Like, I want to maintain continuity. So when you're talking about retakes, Persephone, are you mostly referring to like your own dialogue and those pre-written descriptions and adding stuff in? So you go
All of
back to
it,
your
all of
players?
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I don't get. So it hasn't been so much pushback to like retaking dialogue. I've actually gotten more pushback where I've not decided, but like players were like unsure of how something would come across. And they were like, I want to retake this so that I look better. And I'm like, no. No, it's like, that was a true thing you said. Like, it's one thing if someone makes like a major mistake or snafu, which is one of the benefits to podcast versus stream games. Like you can sort of like critique and like tweak those things, but those don't come up often. It's more like people were sometimes just getting their own head about how they personally are observed, especially as the podcast gets popular, like more popularity, that sort of starts to take place. And like, I support that, but also I'm like, no, you created this raw emotional moment that was very good. We're keeping it. Sorry. You know?
I would mirror that as well. We do a lot of retakes, especially, or I would say, I wouldn't call them retakes, additions for like combat. I'll basically cut the entire combat section, turn it into like a large descriptive text, and then be like, okay, I need you to scream as if you're getting hit like 3 different ways, different intensities.
Cool.
Oh, this is where you get hit with acid splashed in your face. Can I have a good scream from you right from there? Maybe some cursing would fit in Dwarvish, which for us is Icelandic. Here's some Icelandic curse words you can sort of fill in. So we do a lot of that stuff, and it's kind of expected, unfortunately, on our show.
I gotta say, so my audio editor is the biggest fan of Dark Dice, like to the point where I mentioned I was doing this panel and he like freaked out. So like he like, we honestly went through a period where if we were going to do something inspired by Dark Dice and just do that to combat, because combat in D&D can be
so heavy. God,
It can
so
be
heavy,
episodes.
just
episodes
obnoxious.
for a couple minutes.
Yeah, and it's
praise
really
the editor.
It's really one of the things that drags down D&D podcasts, I feel. Like, there's obviously people that love that kind of content, which is why we kept it in our games. But, like, I'm just like, get to the point already. Like, it's so much. But, like, it's a lot of work to do that. Like, you got to go detail by detail, write out what they're doing, make sure that you're describing it properly, have the characters do all that sort of thing. So, like, props to you, Travis.
Well, there's also the agency. The players usually describe what they're doing in a way that's kind of fun. Like, oh, I'm going to shoot him. I'm going to aim for the ear hole or the ear canal. Like that's really weird, but I kind of want to keep that because you're weird and it's fun. That it's weird. And then
Gross. Okay, we'll do that.
Yeah, you know, what's a little ear penetration between friends?
Just enough. I'm so grateful for my partner who does all the sequencing for Dice Shame, and sometimes he'll turn to me and be like, nothing happens this round of combat. I'm going to cut it all out because like everyone misses or something. Like maybe there's a laugh to be had in there, but ultimately you want to save the viewer just feeling like there's too much to listen to. And I feel like actually that's a really interesting. So everyone has combat in their games, correct? Right? Arcade, do you also have combat in your games? Do you find when you're planning sessions that you kind of try to schedule a combat heavy session in between some role play sessions? Like I feel if you're sitting down at a table with your friends, kind of what happens, and maybe you'll have a couple of like dungeon delvey type sessions in a row. But when you're producing content for a listener, you don't want to like overwhelm someone who is in there for the comedy with like a bunch of fortresses or whatever the hell. Do you like
So-
manage that?
I will literally tell players when they're approaching combat heavy areas. I will
love
be
that.
like, hey, this next episode is going to be combat.
Mhm.
The arc we did right before the end of Volume 1 was an arc with a lot of combat. And I straight up told my players, you're going against this evil person who has a bunch of undead on his side. You know that it's going to be combat heavy. Please be aware of that. But the other thing that I also do is give them stuff that isn't combat in the middle of a dungeon. So one of our favorite episodes that we've ever done was a cooking show in a volcano.
That's awesome.
I remember
So
that.
cool.
That was a
love
lot
that.
of
Part
fun.
Their dungeon. Like, they went into a dungeon and they had some combat, and they were told, okay, there are two chefs who are little flame elementals who are arguing with each other. Who's the better chef? You all will get to play as assistant chefs to this flame elemental with your third player judging the game.
Adorable.
And
That's brilliant.
it was great. It worked fantastically. And then in that same dungeon, they had a combat, a dexterity challenge. They also like talked with a giant guard and had to convince him to give up his weapon by challenging him to a game that he would lose at. And they played hide and seek, so he just left the room to go hide, and they just took his weapon and used it. Like it I think for me at least, we started with D&D, and it doesn't always have to be combat. You can always do something fun and different with it. And especially, I believe it's 4E that has skill challenges. Those are always fun also, rather than forcing a combat onto the scene. I think it also gives a lot more sort of control to the players. Recently, I've been playing a lot of PBTA, and we also did Quest, and combat's completely different in Quest. It's very quick. It moves so easily.
It's really cool. It's really good.
Yeah. It like, instead of being like, this is exactly how many feet away you are, it's like, can I hit him with a sword? Can I hit him with a bow? I'm too far.
Yeah.
Basically,
It's very intuitive.
and
And
it just
for
goes
any-
right along.
For anybody listening, that description that RK gave about the volcano and all of that magical stuff, their whole show is that wholesome. It is fantastic. We are just a little under 30 minutes left, so I want to go ahead and get us over to some viewer questions, because we've had a few come through, and I didn't want to stop the conversation because it's been so gosh darn good.
Are we
but-
living? I just need to know, are we living up to your expectation, James?
Oh, absolutely. I
Okay,
could
good.
sit here for the next 3 hours and just talk to you guys. Like, that'd be a great day for me.
It is nice to talk to people that are running other podcasts, because it's
Yeah.
definitely a unique brand of stress that we all
Yes.
experience.
Yes, and that's one of the things that Elizabeth and I wanted. We wanted to get the showrunners, because that's a powerhouse, especially for all of these different shows. So I'm going to, let's see. And oh, look, it's a question from my wife. Elizabeth Wilcox asks, what's the biggest challenge of playing for an audience versus simply playing for fun? Anybody want to start?
Ooh, can I take this one?
Oh, go
Absolutely.
ahead.
Yeah, everyone.
I think
will
we're all
have a
like,
thought.
yes,
Oh, well,
yes,
we're all gonna. Yeah.
Stephanie, please start us off.
So, one, the kind of players that I want for a production versus the kind of players that I want for a casual game are completely different. Two, like, it's performance versus casual play. Like, you are performing. Like, you have to be on. That's why podcast sessions, even with all the technical snafus that can happen and all the mic checks and all that other junk, like, it's energy draining. Like, you have to think of like a podcast recording as sort of like a play that's happening for a very, very long time. So if you have like a 4-hour session, like 4-hour sessions for actors on the stage is a lot, and they're drained by the end of it. So like it's totally different. But yeah.
So for myself, Prison Pals is an all ages game.
Ooh.
So no
Oh.
cursing.
Ooh.
We have
Yeah.
to monitor content. Like we
Oh, I
literally
feel
have a
sinful.
handbook that we give people. Like we have a
Mm.
handbook that we give guests. We have a handbook that like we've made for each other, being like, this is the content we allow, this is the content we don't allow, this is what counts as all ages, and just going through all of that. So that's a huge difference, because normally I curse like a sailor. Mind you, I'm not the worst one on our podcast. It's literally two of our other players who we have to cut around all the cursing for.
That's amazing.
Oh my god, I could.
So
Well, ugh. Sorry, I'm just like over here thinking about that, and I'm like, I swear, like the love child of a dock worker and like I don't know, a Victorian prostitute. Like I cannot. Like I recently got invited to do a guest writing spot on one of the like biggest children's podcasts in the world, and I was like, "Do you know what my content is? do you know like not a good idea."
So
Not a
like
good idea.
that's a big difference for at least our show. The other thing is that like with podcasting and with our show, like Persephone said, it's exhausting. It's so tiring. And one thing that we've had to do just because of like people's moods and things is be like, hey, we only record for like 2 hours because we can't do more than that, because otherwise everyone's ADHD starts acting up and no one can focus. No one's paying attention anymore. Even me, like I lose focus also. So it's a something that we like have to do, is just record smaller bits for the show. Whereas when I play like bigger sessions, like when I play for fun and I know it's not being recorded, it's not as exhausting because I don't have to be on. I can be like, I don't fucking know, give me 5 minutes to like read this thing and double check my notes. Sorry.
Yeah. And I think that leads into a lot of that answers a question we had from Colin. Do you ever feel the need to overact a situation to play to the audience, or do you try and keep things genuine? Yes, we are always on. When you're on the show, you're on. Like, I definitely feel that. Like, I wouldn't call it so much overacting. I'm a very loud and boisterous person to begin with, so my voice can go a bit over the top. But there's definitely like, if I'm feeling like shit at the table, my players can tell. If I'm feeling like shit on the podcast, I try and conceal it a bit better. Hopefully. Travis, what about you? Biggest challenge for playing for act? Yeah, that's true. That's true. But biggest challenge for you playing for an audience versus playing for fun? Because like your show is hyper produced. Beautifully so, but hyper produced.
It's a difference of who I'm trying to entertain. If I'm entertaining the players, I try to do everything I possibly can to make them work together. Skyhook principles. What can keep these players from like dicking each other over? Like, how do I make everyone have a great time? And also, I'm speaking in the present tense, which is really great because it's naturally how we speak about things, as opposed to all of my pre-written descriptions that have painstakingly written out, like Persephone there. But I do it all in the past tense because it's happened. So I'm trying to remember everyone's descriptions of what they just described. All right, I'm going to do this. So-and-so did this in the past tense. And on the show, I'm trying to not have miniatures or maps so that everyone's theater of the mind and they can appreciate it. I do have miniatures and maps for in-person stuff. I really try and push people to create conflict, and I give them backstories that conflict with one another. And I really want them to be beating each other up, not trusting each other, wondering, if they will be betrayed by someone around the table. So it's a difference of, I guess, who we're collectively trying to entertain, which is either ourselves or an audience. And thankfully, the players in the podcast have all agreed to this madness that we go through. But it is a lot of fun. But it's empowerment, I would say. We want the players to be empowered at home and in a casual game versus on my show, which is where I'm trying to take away that power and make them feel like they're being overwhelmed by sort of the Lovecraftian-ish elements, even though I don't touch on Lovecraft stories.
Absolutely. Just to dovetail with Travis there, for me, I think D&D is such a physical game. There's so much physicality in terms of the minis and the maps. And for me as a DM, I really enjoy being around a table with all of my players. And you have to realize, as producers of RPG podcasts, we are in charge of the listeners of the podcast also feeling like they are at the table as a player. Maybe their turn just hasn't come up yet. So you're really in charge of helping them feel like they're able to picture exactly what's going on just through the power of your words and maybe some music that you've composed or some sound effects. So it's really challenging to try to use the language that you choose and to try to provoke that kind of language from your players that allow other people to kind of picture the scene. It has to be so much more vivid and descriptive. Even something as simple as like, okay, roll a dice, you hit, you miss, next person's turn, really needs to be so much more elaborate and engaging for an audience.
Yeah, I would say that there's a lot more, and this is a weird way to put it, but there's a lot more like writerly qualities, even if you're doing things off the cuff, that go into the production of a podcast, because like, and which is something that came easily for me because I never run games offline or online with maps, minis, anything. I tried it once and I got bored. Like everything that I run is theater of the mind. So like, but like making sure that that description is something that is, well, so this goes into something like what I want from my listeners is immersion. What I want from my players is investment. Those are two different things. I want the players to really care about their characters and about the ties that they build and about the things that are going on. And if there's a little bit of a lack of immersion, it doesn't matter because they want to be there. They want to sit at the table. But with the audience, I need them to be fully immersed and believe the situation. And that's sort of the big selling point of some of these like actual play podcasts is yes, you get them to feel like they're at the table, but you also will get them to believe in the world that you're creating or painting. So
I love that difference. That's very important. Yeah.
That is really cool.
Good way to put it.
That is a great way to put it. Guys, this is amazing. I love all of you. I keep saying that. I'm so happy to be here. So Fancher asked...
You're going to have to run a game with all of us.
I would love
please.
to. Yes. I accept. Fancher asked a question that's very tangential to something that I wanted this panel for. Does running a game for a podcast change how you approach casual games? And I think this leads into the bigger question. What have you learned from your productions that you have incorporated to your casual games? And one of the big things for me that we RK touched on earlier was that we only record in like 2-hour chunks. We will record for a nice long bit, and then like we need to take a break. We need to stand up. People need to use the restroom. Typically, like when I'm at my table, I don't allow those things. Like during games is like, no, you're here, you're present. I need you to be actively engaged in what we are doing. And then we'll take like a 1-hour break and we'll all go eat lunch. We'll use the bathroom. We'll do whatever we need to do. And then we all come back. So that's something that I've learned is really good to incorporate in your casual games too. I think it's really important for like me as a game master to inform my players, hey, I need everybody here. And then once we reach a certain point and we're all feeling a bit tired, like just hang in there. And then we're going to take a 15-minute break. Everyone can use the bathroom, stand up, stretch, whatever. Because one of my pet peeves is when we're all sitting at the table playing a game and someone gets up and walks away to get a snack. But that's one of the things that I've learned is that like prescribed breaks are actually extremely useful. And it not only improves the efficiency of the production, I also feel like it improves the efficiency of the actual casual games and the players. I feel like they're a lot more engaged. Knowing that there is that like spot coming up is like a light at the end of the tunnel if they're feeling like uncomfortable sitting in their seat or they need to stand up, they need to use the bathroom, whatever that may be. What about everybody else? Like, what have you learned?
I'm like the literal exact opposite of that. I
was going to say the exact same thing.
Yeah,
Really?
I want my players to be as comfortable as humanly possible, and I don't want them to continue gaming if they need to use the bathroom or if they're hungry or if they're having, an ADHD moment, which I have I'm 95% sure that every single game I've run, everyone has had ADHD, including myself. I've been diagnosed since I was 2. So like, there's just things that you cannot there was a point with the podcast where I was like, where people were like afraid to tell me that they need to use the bathroom or anything else because they were afraid of interrupting. And it's like, no, I need you to be at your best, which means that you need to use the bathroom, go. You need to do whatever, go. And then with casual games, I'm just like, whatever, it's casual, we're having fun, we're around the table, I know you care about the game and I know you care about what's going on. Don't leave in the middle of one of my descriptions, but like, go do the thing that you need to do because this is fun and this is for fun. Like, that's just the way that I am with this, I think.
Same exact thing for me. Like, when it comes to one of the biggest things that I've brought over from podcasting is the use of safety tools. And one of those safety tools is the open door policy. I always tell everyone at my table, if you need to get up at any point to go to the bathroom, to make a sandwich, to walk your dog, to talk to your mom, doesn't matter what it is, go do that. Because I'd rather you do that and feel okay about that than worry about like, oh no, what's happening in game? Oh no, I need to do this thing really badly. And it's especially important because like, I have a lot of friends who are disabled, who like need to get up and stretch or have some sort of disability that like means that they can't sit still for a really long period of time without doing actual physical damage to themselves. And so having that not just at my podcast or my streams, but also my home games of just being like, hey, you can get up and go. I won't cut to you. I won't punish you for this. If we're in combat, we'll all take a break and get up and go. Like, doing that is so important, I think, for all tables, not just for podcasting, not just for streaming. We also I also now schedule breaks. I tell my players we'll have a break every hour. So that way it's a smaller break. You can do what you need to do. And if it's a really, really long session, we'll have a break for an hour for lunch or that kind of thing. So like, I think that a lot of times there's this pull to like sit and just charge through it, but some people just can't, and that's okay. And like making those adjustments makes them safer and more comfortable at your table. And that's something that I bring to all my tables now.
The other thing, sorry.
That's okay. No, I just wanted to say this is one of the reasons why I wanted to have this is because like all you guys saying that, I'm like, oh fuck. Those are good points. I should start doing that. Maybe I've been doing this wrong this whole time. And that's great. Those are the conversations. I mean, it's like, it's good. Those are the kinds of conversations that I was.
So everyone knows.
Yeah, everybody knows. It's fine. But like, those are all really good points that I hadn't really considered before. And moving forward, yeah, I'm gonna change up my game a little bit. I'm gonna make it more of an open door because like, I think I fixate too much on the like production side of it. But at the end of the day, yeah,
it's easy to do.
People need to be comfortable. They need to be comfortable. They need to do whatever is going to make them feel safe. And if I'm causing someone physical discomfort with how long I'm going and forcing them to sit in a seat, kind of makes me a giant fucking dick.
No, James, you're learning.
Well,
we're all learning here.
The other thing
that's
you
the
keep in
thing.
mind too is that this also applies to you. So your own physical discomfort when running games, like you also got to take care of yourself. So like, you know, you have to extend the same sort of kindness to yourself and your players as you can.
Totally. Just to return to Fancher's question for a moment, he asked, does running a game for a podcast change how you approach casual games? And I just wanted to say that being part of Dice Shame for 1.5 years has helped me realize that I cannot be precious with my own story and my own ideas about where things are going to be headed. And I think that's something that I really kind of held close to me as a DM prior to Dice Shame was like, no, I'm the DM. I know what's going to happen. The players are going to go through these challenges either in ways A, B, or C, and then this is how it's going to resolve. But when you're doing such a long form campaign and working with the same players all the time, you get to kind of examine your own prejudices or failings in terms of storytelling, and that's really helped me learn how to be more flexible as a DM, I think.
I completely agree. I've like one of the things that I've started doing is pulling back the curtain more often. I know we discussed that earlier, but I run paid games now, and something that I do is I tell the players, especially since most of my paid games are like 8 sessions total, around session 4 I say, think about your character. Where do you want them to go? Where do you
Cool.
want them to be by the end of the campaign? And I have these discussions with players. I basically say, what do you want from the story? And I've had a player straight up tell me, I would like my character to die by the
I was just
And
gonna
I was
say,
like,
Yeah.
I love those.
how do you deal with
Totally
Yeah,
that?
me
so
too.
much.
I totally fine. And like I've
Sometimes
had
it
other
wrecks
people
me.
who are like, I really want to make out with this other character in game because we've been playing up this romance and we've been doing
Can I
the
have
will
that
they
fan
won't
over
they.
here?
Sure, I'll mail it to you.
Thank you. But
Like,
so
Fresh from
RK then,
Massachusetts.
how do you handle PC death if it's not prescribed by the player? Do you ever like spring that on someone, or do you let them know in advance, especially when it's part of like a product that you're creating?
I've never actually killed a player before. Like never killed a character off. What I normally do though, or what I've like tried to do, my plan is always I will tell you if you're heading into a situation where there's a likelihood you will die. Like
And
I
then
will
it's on
tell
you?
and it's not just on you, but also like, are you okay with your character dying? Especially for a product and for your players, like, is a player okay with their character dying? Are they okay saying goodbye to that story?
Mhm.
What do they want to do with that story is important. One of the big things that we do with Prism Pals is that your character doesn't die. We changed the like how death works. I forget what we ended up calling it, but instead of death saving throws, we made it so it was a different type of roll. Instead of rolling for do I die, you're rolling for do I still want to be a hero? Do I still want to
cool.
adventure? So what ends up happening is if you go down and you get 3 fails, you can still end out the adventure or like the arc we're on, but after that your character chooses to become an NPC basically.
That's cool.
It's like doing morale rolls.
Mhm.
And I think one of the big reasons why you guys did that, RK, correct me if I'm wrong, is because one of the PCs is a child.
Yeah. We have one of our PCs is a 10-year-old who is in the middle of adventuring. That was one of the reasons why we did it. We also did it because we were like, having our characters die on a show that's meant to be all ages, like die violently, seems not appropriate for us. We also had an actual player death. One of our players passed away in real life from cancer, and we had to figure out how we were going to handle that with his character. And we knew he was terminal when we started the podcast. We knew the entire time we were recording it because it was just something we wanted to do with that person. And so how we handled that was very important to us. Like we had a lot of calls with each other, just being like, how do we want to handle this? Talking with that player and getting their agency for it. Yeah, it's a complicated process, but I think it's very important. It takes
Yes.
a lot of work and a lot of effort, but it's very important to do.
I want to hear what Travis is going to say.
Yeah, I
about
do
this.
too. We've covered a bit, and I've seen his facial expressions shifting and changing, and knowing the show Dark Dice.
So many
Travis,
people
please.
die.
Yeah, exactly. Because like I'm sitting here and I'm like, Travis, like, is that something like you told your players like when they signed up for this? Is like, oh yeah, you're gonna die most likely.
Basically, it's kind of it's like, oh yeah, I'm gonna try and do everything I can to kill you. Please stay alive. I'd love to have this be more than we've one episode. But we originally didn't plan on making a podcast. That was just gonna be like a bonus one-off episode, and they weren't supposed to make it even past the first encounter. I thought it was pretty brutal, but I forgot the probability of dice rolls and how I was gonna fail because I always roll poorly. But yeah, our first player death came as a surprise to all of us, from one player to another player who didn't mean to attack that player because of a compulsion. And one person was suddenly gone from the table, and the stakes were suddenly raised because like my wife was no longer playing, and she'd written this really nice backstory and how she died and the event she prevented through her death, losing someone else at the table, was also like really impactful. So player death is just a natural thing for us, and we expect it a lot of times. And I brought that with my home, my casual games are that way as well. If you die, you die. If you're really attached to the character, maybe we can find a way to bring them back. But I don't do that on Dark Dice. But things I've also brought through are really a lot tie into agency, the X card, that sort of stuff, because I don't mean to take things toward horror, but I don't even realize I'm doing it sometimes. I'm way too deep down the horror sidetrack. And I also have players fill out the charts on what they're comfortable and not comfortable with in terms of
those
consent
charts are
forms.
amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, they're lifesaver, and they can prevent X cards from ever being drawn, because you're like, oh, well, I could just skip this section of Out of the Abyss because it gets really weird in some spots. That's fairly helpful and fun, I'd say. But those are the things pulled.
So going to like, in addition to this, and like also going back to like what have we pulled from our like podcasts to our casual games. In addition to consent forms, I do full like business proposal style thing, like one sheets for all of my campaigns that will detail all the themes, all the like the certain kinds of triggers that might come up, like the summary, like the premise or the like abstract of the campaign, and then I will hand it to players and be like, I'll give them usually like 5 and be like, which ones do you want to do? Which game do you want to do? Because I always have like 18 games in my back pocket. And like, I'll also be like, if you're not comfortable with these themes, maybe this game isn't for you, so on and so forth. And then like always, those themes are always negotiable depending on like if someone really wants to play the game and they have discomfort with one thing, that can be written out. It allows for everyone to be on the same page a little bit more, I think. And that's something that I actually, in the opposite way, pulled from my other casual campaigns to when I started doing professional campaigns, because that's something that I've really always done, because I'm weird. I don't know.
All right, everyone, we are running on the last 2 minutes of this amazing panel, and I wish I could draw it out more than that, but we cannot. Thank you all so much for being here. If you guys just want to go through one last time, remind everybody what your name is, what your project is, where to find you, and anything else you all would like to plug. Let us start with Persephone.
Hi, I'm Persephone, aka Persephonoth. I am the DM of Fast Times at D&D High. You can find it at the website down below. You can also find me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitch at Persephonoth. I'm very active on Twitter and Twitch. I also, towards the end of May, will be producing my first big stream show, Critical Love, which is a parody / homage to a bunch of reality dating shows, Total Drama Island and stuff that will be in 5e. We're going to have a very big cast of 15 players that will cycle. We'll have guest judges. It's being produced with Rock Punch ATL, and it'll be a lot of fun, I promise.
Excellent. Travis.
I'm Travis Vengroff. My show is Dark Dice. You can find us at Dark Dice Pod on the com or Twitter, Insta. We're on all the socials. And we're about to start our next season, and it's going to be quite fun. Lastly, if you're into horror and you like the cast of the Dark Dice, we have another show that we're all on called The White Vault, where we're all murdered in the Arctic, and it's scripted.
Wonderful. RK.
Hi, I'm RK Wilde. You can find me on Twitter at Russ Wildest, and you can find my podcast at Prism Pals on Twitter as well. We're currently on hiatus from Volume 1, and we're working on Volume 2. You can also find me GMing The Burned Bunch on Off the Table.
Perfect. And of course, the wonderful Joe.
I'm Joe Fallak. This has been a wonderful panel. If you want more of me, you can check me out on my podcast called Dice Shame. That's available wherever you get podcasts, or follow me on Twitter. I'm Joe_Scope there. Or you can visit us every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time at the Invictus stream. We stream on YouTube and Twitch, and check out our Discord. It's a great community, and everyone will just flood you with gifts when you join up. So thank you so much, James. This has been a great panel.
Absolutely. And I, of course, am your wonderful moderator, James Schwartz. Thank you all so much for joining us this weekend for a plethora of panels and games. Stay tuned, because in just 5 minutes, we are going to have the closing ceremonies once again live streamed. You can, of course, follow me on my show, the Dimension Door Podcast, and I would love to give one last shout out. Thank you, Joe and Harlan and everyone at Invictus, for inviting me to moderate panels and for having so many wonderful panels. And of course, thank you to my wonderful wife, Elizabeth Wilcox, for finding all of these wonderful people specifically for this panel. This was amazing. I love you all. Everybody out there, stick around for closing ceremonies. Goodbye.